first saw her at the side of the road on a rainless, windless afternoon. She couldn't have been older than 10, barefoot, wearing a pale dress that clung to her as though it were soaked. The air was bone dry, but her hair hung heavy, dripping dark water onto the asphalt. I slowed my truck without thinking, rolling down the window. "You lost?" I asked. She didn't answer, just turned her head slowly toward me, her eyes the color of cloudy dishwater. I've never forgotten how she looked at me. Not curious, not scared, just certain. Certain that I was supposed to stop. Her voice was faint but sharp. "My house is close. Can you take me?" I should have pretended I didn't hear her and just driven away. But something in the way she stood, still as a nailed-down shadow, made me lean over and unlock the passenger door. When she climbed in, the wet smell hit me first, pungent and earthy, like a drowned basement. She didn't buckle her seatbelt. She didn't need to. She sat perfectly still, staring straight ahead. "Which way?" I asked. "Straight," she whispered. We drove in silence. My radio stayed off. The highway grew narrower, the asphalt breaking apart under creeping moss. The sun dimmed as though dusk had come early. At last, she spoke again. "It's been a long time since someone came for me." I glanced at her. "Your parents must be worried sick." "They stopped being worried a long time ago," she said, without blinking. "But you will be." Her tone was so certain, so quietly final, that I nearly stopped right there. We turned down a gravel lane shrouded by oaks whose branches bent low, heavy with moss. A house appeared, if you could call it that. The air around it was thick, like walking into an old dream you'd forgotten on purpose. "This is it," she said. I parked but didn't cut the engine. "You live here?" She turned to me for the first time since we'd started driving. The pupils of her eyes had stretched until her irises were almost gone. "I did." Something wet slapped against the windshield. Not rain, thicker. I looked up and saw droplets sliding down the glass, brownish red, leaving streaks. "What the hell?" When I turned back to the passenger seat, it was empty. The door was still shut. I stepped out. The ground felt wrong beneath my boots, too soft, like stepping on flesh. The smell of rot clung to the back of my throat. I called out for her, my voice muffled by the heavy air. A low sound came from the house, something between a sob and a gurgle. I stepped onto the porch. The wood bent and groaned under me. Inside, the floor was black with water, reflecting the warped ceiling. Each step sent ripples out, distorting my reflection into something hunched and wrong. In the center of the flooded living room, she stood, water up to her waist, her hair spread around her like ink in clear water. "I never left," she said, her voice coming from too many directions at once. "The house keeps me. It wants more." I took a step back. The water around her began to churn, though she hadn't moved. Something beneath the surface pressed upward. A pale hand, then another, dozens of them, breaking through like dead flowers blooming. I ran for the door, but the water followed, slapping against my legs, though I hadn't stepped into it. The hands were close, impossibly close, fingers brushing my calves. I made it to the porch, but the boards sagged violently, as though something beneath was pulling them down. I leapt to the gravel and ran. Behind me, she called in that splintered voice. "You'll come back. They all do." I didn't stop running until I reached the truck. My boots left wet prints on the dry gravel. I drove faster than I should have, heart punching at my ribs. The air seemed lighter once the lane was gone, but my clothes never dried. The smell of rot lingered in the cab. That night, I dreamed of her. She was older, maybe 20 now, but her eyes hadn't changed. She stood at the foot of my bed, dripping onto the floor. "You came for me," she whispered. "Now, I'll come for you." I woke with water pooling under me. My sheets clung like her dress had. It's been 3 days. My skin is cold all the time, no matter how hot the shower runs. My reflection flickers like water over glass. And last night, I heard wet footsteps in the hall. I don't think she ever needed a ride. I think she was already on her way here. The house was supposed to be abandoned. That was the only reason I took the job. 3 days of caretaking for a property before it was sold. Easy money. Keep the doors locked, check the rooms twice a day, and make sure nothing collapsed. Ash Lane was narrow and overgrown, the kind of road where even midday looked like dusk. The trees leaned over it, their blackened branches knitted so tightly that no sunlight reached the ground. My tires cracked over old fallen twigs that looked almost charred. The house sat at the end. Ivy crept high along the siding, strangling the wood. The key turned in the lock with more resistance than it should have, and the door opened into air thick with dust. The wallpaper peeled in curling strips. The floorboards had a tired groan, and the walls seemed to hold themselves upright out of habit rather than strength. Still, it didn't feel empty. My skin prickled with the sense of eyes at the edge of my vision, though I saw nothing. On the first night, I slept in the smallest bedroom. Smaller rooms felt safer. The cold there was strange. It didn't settle on the skin so much as sink into the marrow. At some point after midnight, I woke to faint footfalls overhead. I thought it was the attic settling. Still, my flashlight stayed clutched in my hand until the gray of dawn. On the second day, I explored upstairs. The boards underfoot were softer here, almost spongy in places. At the far end of the hall stood a single locked door, its wood darker than the others, cold even through my gloves. The handle turned partway, but stopped, and a faint vibration hummed in the metal as though something on the other side was breathing. That afternoon, while fetching firewood from the shed, movement caught my eye at the edge of the hedge. An old woman stood there, motionless, her posture unnervingly straight, her head turned slightly toward the house. She wore a dark dress that moved in a wind I couldn't feel. Her skin looked the same shade as the ash-colored sky. I blinked, and she was gone. By the third night, the locked door stood open. I didn't remember hearing it. Inside was a small, bare room with a single rocking chair facing the window. The air was warmer here, but smelled of faint, scorched wood. The chair rocked gently, though nothing in the room stirred it. Something shifted in the corner. A figure hunched there beneath layers of faded fabric. A head hung forward, long white hair spilling forward like brittle cobweb. Her skin was gray, paper-thin, spotted with deep stains. The rocking slowed. The figure raised its head. Her eyes were black pits, absorbing every shred of light. Her jaw sagged open, not revealing teeth, but a hollow cavity filled with ash. The ash shifted, restless, and something long and jointed moved inside it like the twitch of insect limbs. The air thickened, pressing against me. My heartbeat roared in my ears. The floor beneath me softened into something wet and yielding. My boots sank half an inch into it before I realized it wasn't wood anymore. The ash from her mouth spilled across the floor, spreading in all directions, climbing the walls. It moved like it knew where I was. I tore myself free and fled into the hall, but it had changed. It seemed longer than before, its edges sharpened, the light dimmer. Old photographs lined the walls, photographs that hadn't been there the day before. They all showed her, younger but unmistakable, standing in different rooms of the house. In each one, she had turned slightly, her gaze following me from frame to frame. I reached the stairs and froze. She was already on them. Her limbs bent wrong, joints folding in unnatural ways as she crawled downward. Her head lolled back, those hollow eyes locked on me. Her movements were jerky. I bolted for the front door. My hands fumbled with the lock, the key turning slow as if submerged in thick liquid. Behind me, the air hissed softly, like embers catching flame. When the door finally gave, I stumbled out into the night. The air was cold now, but the house breathed a wave of dry heat after me, heavy and suffocating. I didn't stop running until I reached the car. The windows were fogged from the inside. On the driver's side glass, a long-fingered handprint spread in the condensation, too narrow to be mine. I drove without looking back. But at the final bend of Ash Lane, she was there, standing beneath the skeletal trees, dark dress hanging still, head tilted toward the road. This time, her gaze wasn't fixed on the house. It was fixed on me. Since then, small changes have begun. A scatter of ash appeared across my bedroom floor, fine and gray, as if sifted through unseen fingers. The air feels heavier, as though something is standing just outside my vision, leaning closer. And now, as I write this, the temperature has shifted. The warmth isn't comforting, It's the dry, suffocating heat of a breath against the back of my neck. It's closer now. I took the key from my brother's cold hands the day after his funeral. There was no goodbye, no warning, just the small brass key resting in an old, worn envelope, folded carefully and sealed with faded wax. The letter inside bore only an address, his workshop at the old mill on Ash Lane. No other instructions, no explanation. I never understood my brother. Quiet to the point of silence, he lived like a shadow in the family. Never married, no close friends. Just the mill, and now, this key. The road to Ravenswood Hollow twisted sharply, squeezing between gnarled, lifeless trees whose branches clawed desperately at a sky smeared with dark clouds. The sun hid behind a thick veil of fog, and a damp chill clung to the air. When I arrived, the old sawmill stood silent, swallowed by creeping vines and patches of mold that stained the weathered wooden walls. Its windows, grimy and fractured, reflected nothing but shadow. Nearby, a rusted iron gate hung crookedly, groaning on its hinges as the cold wind whispered through the broken slats. I hesitated before stepping inside. The air smelled of rot and dust, mixed with the faint, sweet scent of old wood. Inside, the workshop was frozen in time. Tools scattered on benches, half-carved pieces of wood leaning against the walls, and shelves lined with jars of nails, screws, and forgotten odds and ends. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling, swinging slightly as if moved by a breath of wind. But at the far end of the room, my gaze was drawn to something new, a door I'd never seen before. It was tall, narrow, and painted a dull, chalky white that seemed almost to glow faintly in the dark. The wood was old but polished, and the frame was inset into the wall as if it had grown there. I stepped closer, the floor creaking beneath me. My fingers trembled as I pulled the brass key from my pocket. It fit the lock perfectly, sliding in with a smoothness that sent an odd thrill down my spine. When I turned the key, the lock clicked softly. The air shifted. A strange silence fell over the room, heavier than before. It was like the entire building held its breath. I stopped. The door remained shut, but it felt alive, watching, waiting. In the dark of my apartment, the memory of the door haunted me. I tried to tell myself it was just an old building playing tricks on my mind, but when I closed my eyes, I saw the door again. It was no longer just a door. It breathed. The wood seemed to pulse, expanding and contracting like a lung. Shadows writhed behind it, vast, shifting shapes that defied form. Back at the mill the next day, the door was just a door again, but the atmosphere was heavier, charged with something I couldn't name. I worked through the morning, but every sound, the scraping of my tools, the distant call of a bird felt distant, muted, as if filtered through water. Then I heard it. 3 slow knocks coming from the door. I froze. The knocks weren't loud, but they carried a weight that pressed down on my chest. There was no one on the other side. I checked. The hallway beyond the workshop was empty, shrouded in gloom. The knocking stopped. The silence stretched, a living thing wrapping around me. I left the mill early that day, my skin crawling with unease. At home, the temperature shifted unexpectedly. The air grew warmer, thick and suffocating. It felt like a breath right behind my neck, hot and wet, and I kept catching movement in the corner of my eyeshadows flickering just beyond the light. Sleep fled me again. On the 3rd day, I returned to the mill, despite every instinct screaming not to. The door loomed at the far end, pale and indifferent. But then the knocking started again, 3 deliberate thuds, slow and steady, reverberating through the floorboards. Beneath the knocking came something else, a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the walls, shaking the dust from the rafters. I pressed my ear to the door. The breathing behind it was deep and slow, unnatural in its cadence. I stumbled back, heart hammering, hands slick with cold sweat. I spent the next hours wandering the workshop, trying to distract myself. But the temperature was uneven, patches of oppressive warmth drifting through the cold air. That night, I dreamed of the door again. It stretched impossibly tall, twisting like a serpent. The wood shifted, flexing as if alive. Behind it, a vast shadow pressed, a darkness so deep it swallowed light whole. I heard whispers, then ancient voices murmuring words I couldn't understand. I woke screaming, but no sound came out. The fourth day, I barely managed to step inside the mill. The air was heavy, thick with humidity and the scent of wet earth. The door pulsed faintly, vibrating beneath my fingertips. The knocking was louder now, 3 heavy beats followed by a scratching noise. The breathing grew louder too, filling every corner of the workshop with a primal, ancient rhythm. I reached out, my hand trembling as it touched the door. The wood was slick, almost wet, and cold despite the heat in the air. I turned the key again, unlocking the door with a reluctant creak. It moved inward like a living thing, slow and deliberate. Heat surged from the opening, burning my skin. The darkness inside was vast and empty, swallowing everything. I saw nothing, but felt the presence something enormous, watching me, waiting. I slammed the door shut, stumbling backward, heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. My hands were slick with a cold, sticky substance I couldn't identify. I locked it again and fled the mill. Now, days later, the door remains closed, but I can't escape it. At home, the temperature shifts without warning, waves of unnatural warmth that roll in and settle around me. Sometimes, when I'm alone, I hear it. The knocking. 3 slow, deliberate knocks echoing through the walls of my apartment. The door waits. And I know, somehow, it will open again. When it does, whatever lies beyond will step out. And there will be no turning back.